President Trump is taking aim at writer Michael Wolff following the latest Epstein files documents dump from the DOJ. The president did accuse Wolff of conspiring with Epstein to try to destroy his political career. Wolff does appear in the documents that were published last November, and he appeared to be acting as Epstein's unofficial advisor and publisher ahead of the 2016 election, even went so far as to call Epstein the, quote, bullet that could end Trump's 2016 bid. Trump addressed Wolff's alleged conspiracy on Air Force One over the weekend, even indicating the latest document dump proves he did nothing wrong. Take a listen.
It looked like this guy Wolff, who's a writer, was conspiring with Epstein to do harm to me. And I didn't see it myself, but I was told by some very important people that not only does it absolve me, it's the opposite of what people were hoping, the radical left. That Wolff, who's a third-rate writer, was conspiring with Jeffrey Epstein to hurt me, politically or otherwise, and that came through loud and clear. So we'll probably sue Wolff.
What's up, friends? Welcome back. Adam is here, so let's get started. Trump just replicated the exact legal blunder Melania made months ago, and he did it on camera, on Air Force One with the microphones live. Visibly furious at author Michael Wolff, he looked straight into the lens and announced they would sue him. Not a vague threat, an unequivocal declaration. We are absolutely going to sue him. The problem? Threatening litigation against a journalist on live television in front of the entire press pool is not a power move. It's a gift to the other side's lawyers.
I woke up this morning and found that last night Donald Trump had threatened to sue me again. I think this is the third or possibly fourth time the President of the United States has threatened to sue me. Apparently, he was asked about his reaction to the 3 million pages of Epstein files that had been released. And his response was that, he was going to sue Wolff, a writer, because I had conspired with Epstein to frame him, I think was his point.
To the untrained ear, this sounds like standard political bravado. A powerful executive is aggrieved. He throws his weight around, and the news cycle churns. Lawmakers and tycoons make empty legal threats every single day, and usually the world yawns and scrolls past. However, to dismiss this as routine is to miss the venom in the snake. This is not merely a man in a bad mood. This is a man stepping directly into the same bear trap that has already snapped shut on his spouse. To understand the sheer, breathtaking foolishness of this airborne declaration, you must grasp the repeated nature of this blunder. According to Michael Wolff's own detailed accounts, this was not the inaugural threat. It wasn't even the sophomore effort. This marked the third or fourth distinct occasion where the Trump dynasty, encompassing both the former president and the former first lady, has tried to bury Wolff under the weight of legal annihilation.
Author Michael Wolff has claimed in a lawsuit that First Lady Melania Trump threatened to sue him for over $1 billion in damages if he didn't retract Jeffrey Epstein-related statements he made about her. Wolff said in the lawsuit that Melania Trump's threat to sue came over statements he made to the Daily Beast and in 3 videos published on social media, although he added some statements were incomplete phrases and were taken out of context. The lawsuit came on Tuesday, the deadline set by Melania Trump's lawyer for Wolff to retract statements, issue an apology, and pay damages to his client. Through his lawsuit, Wolff announced his intention to use the legal action to put the president and his wife under oath to answer questions about Epstein. Wolff conducted interviews with Epstein before his death. The lawsuit noted that Wolff never said Melania Trump was involved in any of Epstein's crimes. Among the statements the lawsuit said were true were those saying Melania Trump was very involved in Epstein's social circle, where she met her future husband, and that it was fair to question how Melania Trump fits into the Epstein story. Wolff has published a dozen books, including 4 bestsellers about the president.
And here lies the devastating punchline that reveals their strategic bankruptcy. Every single time they have drawn this sword, the only concrete outcome has been Wolff drawing a bigger sword and charging directly at them. Let's map the topography of this disaster, because the narrative unfolds like a slapstick tragedy where the protagonist refuses to acknowledge he is holding the wrong end of the chainsaw. The story ignites because Michael Wolff, the literary hitman responsible for exposing the chaotic underbelly of the Trump White House in explosive bestsellers, decided to speak his truth into a microphone. He appeared on a high-profile podcast platform and steered his ship directly into the stormy waters of Melania Trump's alleged proximity to the late predator, Jeffrey Epstein. Wolff didn't wander into this minefield unarmed or spouting tabloid gossip. He carried a trove of ammunition. He possessed an arsenal of recorded dialogues, extensive sit-downs with Epstein himself gathered meticulously across a span of multiple years. Epstein hadn't just been a casual footnote in Wolff's research. He was a fountain of intimate information, a primary source who once characterized his bond with Donald Trump as the tightest of friendships. Armed with this hard evidence, Wolff began doing exactly what a rigorous investigative reporter is mandated to do. He started interrogating the gray areas. He posed logical, piercing questions regarding Melania's specific positioning within the Epstein ecosystem. He asked how the introduction between a Slovenian model and a real estate mogul was truly brokered, and he probed the authentic depth of her association with the now incarcerated enabler Ghislaine Maxwell. This line of inquiry did not sit well in the gilded halls of Trump's defense apparatus. The response from Melania's legal camp was immediate, volcanic, and disproportionately aggressive. They fired off a cease and desist missile, a legal communique dripping with menace and threatening a defamation suit with damages that boggle the mind. They attached a financial demand topping $1 billion, demanding Wolff retract every word, kneel with an apology, and permanently seal his lips regarding the matter. They meticulously itemized a laundry list of statements they alleged were false, primarily targeting the assertion that Melania circulated within Epstein's inner social ring. In 99% of these scenarios, the party receiving $1 billion death threat folds like a cheap suit. The typical response involves frantic calls to high-priced attorneys, panicked negotiations, and a hastily drafted public apology scrubbed clean of any admission of guilt. But Michael Wolff operates outside the typical paradigm. He is not a creature who scurries back into the woodwork when the lights come on. Instead of retreating, he executed a tactical reverse sweep that transformed the entire landscape of the conflict. He beat Melania to the courthouse steps and filed a lawsuit against her first. Wolff anchored his legal counteroffensive in the solid bedrock of New York's anti-SLAPP statutes. For those uninitiated in the dark arts of legal intimidation, SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. These are the grotesque tools used by the powerful to drain the resources and willpower of critics through the sheer expense of litigation. Anti-SLAPP laws are the shield designed to sever these tentacles of intimidation, safeguarding free expression against frivolous weaponized lawsuits. By becoming the plaintiff, Wolff performed a legal jiu-jitsu move of sublime elegance. He transmuted himself from a target cowering behind a shield into an aggressor wielding the devastating spear of subpoena power. He was transparent about his aspirations, refusing to cloak his strategy in vague legalese. Wolff didn't merely want a declaratory judgment that he was innocent of defamation. He wanted to drag both Donald and Melania Trump into a sealed deposition room. He wanted to place them under the hot lights, lock them into sworn testimony, and excavate every buried artifact concerning their intimate history with Jeffrey Epstein. The sheer audacity of this maneuver takes the breath away. A journalist faced with financial obliteration responds by crafting a legal mechanism specifically engineered to force his aggressors to spill their darkest secrets under the penalty of perjury. It is akin to someone threatening to burn your house down, only for you to hand them a match and tell them they have to sit in the living room while the fire spreads. This is precisely where Melania's high-powered legal artillery made their first fatal miscalculation. They believed they could swat this nuisance away with procedural pretzel logic. They attacked the delivery of the legal documents, claiming the server handed the complaint to a doorman at a Manhattan tower rather than into the manicured hands of the defendant herself, thus invalidating the entire process. They filed motions to dismiss, arguing over the technicalities of jurisdiction and the failure to state a viable claim. They unleashed a legal battalion from a multinational megafirm, initiating a chess game aimed at shifting the venue from a state arena to a federal court. It was a classic war of attrition. File every motion imaginable, erect walls of paper, and pray that the opponent bankrupts his spirit before he bankrupts his bank account. Yet, as the legal magicians were mesmerized by their own procedural pyrotechnics, a seismic event occurred in the background that would render their efforts tragically obsolete. The Department of Justice began releasing the Epstein files. We are not talking about a trickle of redacted pages, we are talking about an avalanche of raw, unvarnished data released in million-page torrents. Emails, flight logs, financial spreadsheets, photographic evidence, and witness depositions started flooding into the public domain. And surfacing repeatedly amidst this tsunami of filth was the unmistakable name of Melania Trump. The files coughed up a piece of evidence so damning that it likely made her legal counsel choke on their morning coffee. It was an electronic correspondence from the early 2000s, a period when Melania was deeply involved with Donald, directed toward the very hands-on madam of Epstein's operation, Ghislaine Maxwell. The tone was not that of a distant acquaintance. It was warm, familiar, and sugary. Melania complimented Maxwell on a recent magazine photograph, referencing a story about Epstein with casual amusement. She observed the globe-trotting lifestyle Maxwell led and signed off with an affectionate declaration of love. Maxwell, currently rotting in a concrete cell for her monstrous crimes, replied using a pet name dripping with sickening intimacy, describing her travel itinerary as if catching up with a sister. This was not a diplomatic memo arranging a real estate deal. This was a snapshot of a personal friendship, a digital kiss between two women, one of whom was actively procuring teenagers for a Wall Street predator. From a legal standpoint, this single email was a hydrogen bomb detonating directly beneath the foundation of Melania's threats. The fundamental core of any defamation action is falsity. You must prove the defendant told a lie. Wolff's central thesis was that Melania existed within the Epstein social orbit. This email, stamped with a timestamp and server logs, proved that assertion was substantially bulletproof. How do you walk into a courtroom and claim it's a malicious, reputation-shattering lie to say you were friendly with a sex trafficker's accomplice when your own words show you signing off with love while discussing the trafficker in question? The cognitive dissonance required to proceed with such a lawsuit is staggering. The legal terrain grows even more treacherous when considering Melania's status. She is not a private citizen plucked from obscurity. She is a globally recognized public figure. This distinction activates the merciless standards set forth by a landmark Supreme Court precedent. When public officials or figures attempt to silence their critics, they must scale a mountain of proof far higher than the average citizen. It is insufficient to show a statement was merely inaccurate or incomplete. The plaintiff must clear the bar of actual malice, a legal term of art requiring clear and convincing evidence that the speaker knew the information was false or entertained such grave doubts about its truth that they effectively turned a blind eye. Pinning this standard on Michael Wolff is like trying to nail fog to a wall. Wolff didn't spin a conspiracy theory out of thin air. He relied on hours of tape-recorded interviews with the central criminal mind himself, Jeffrey Epstein. The released files continuously reinforce Wolff's perspective rather than debunking it. We see photographic records of the Trump family socializing with Epstein and Maxwell at their palatial resort. We see references to Melania embedded in email chains between Epstein and Wolff. We see a mosaic of evidence confirming the rapport. Where is the reckless disregard for the truth? If anything, the truth seems to be frantically chasing after Wolff, begging to be confirmed. Legal analysts surveying this wreckage have largely concluded that Melania's path to victory is a mirage, a shimmering illusion that retreats the moment you approach it. Much of what Wolff stated during his podcast appearance is protected rhetorical questioning, hypothetical exploration, and opinion grounded in disclosed facts. The act of asking a question is not a defamatory statement. What was her role is the work of a reporter, not a slanderer. The true strategic genius of Wolff's countersuit lies in the trap it sets. Should Melania ever muster the courage to move forward with the billion-dollar claim, she perforce places the entire Trump-Epstein nexus directly into evidence. The defense would be entitled to limitless discovery. This means forcing Melania into a leather chair with a court reporter, asking her to recall, under oath, the very first time she laid eyes on Maxwell. It means asking Donald Trump to recreate the timeline of his brotherhood with a man he now claims to barely recall. It means opening the vault on how they met, what they witnessed, and when they learned the truth about the massages. This is Wolff's stated aim, the white whale he has been hunting in plain sight for years. The billion-dollar threat was the harpoon he used to secure the rope. You would assume that witnessing his spouse walk blindly into this wood chipper would have served as a potent cautionary lesson for Donald Trump. You would assume a man with access to the finest legal minds would have been advised to keep his mouth shut. That assumption, however, severely underestimates Trump's allergy to strategic patience. While cruising at altitude this past weekend, the compulsion to attack overwhelmed his survival instincts. The trigger was the Justice Department's latest data dump of evidence, a mountain of over 3 million fresh pages of Epstein-related documents. Deep inside this new cache of secrets, investigators uncovered a vein of communications that sent shockwaves through the political establishment. These were direct dialogues between Michael Wolff and Jeffrey Epstein, spanning the critical window of Trump's initial rise to political power. The emails revealed Wolff cultivating Epstein as a source with the explicit, aggressive goal of extracting damning information about Trump's private behavior. The language in the digital exchanges is surgical in its intent. Wolff writes of strategies to engineer a situation where Trump incriminates himself if pressed on the nature of the relationship. He discusses conceptual scenarios where pressure forces Trump into a metaphorical corner right before the voters head to the ballot box. From a traditional journalism ethics standpoint, these messages paint a portrait of a reporter obsessed with exposing a candidate's sordid connections. Wolff was doing his job, prodding a primary source to go on the record to expose a candidate's weaknesses. But Trump, reading from these files, did not see journalism. He saw a high-level conspiracy. He branded Wolff a hack, a bottom feeder, and alleged that the correspondence proved a calculated plot between a dirty writer and a dirty pedophile to derail his political destiny. He labeled the entire arrangement a conspiracy that screamed for justice, and then he declared legal war from the Oval Office in the sky. Now just absorb the irony here for a moment. By framing this as a conspiracy to victimize him, Trump is inadvertently broadcasting a confession that has haunted him for decades. If Epstein and Wolff were conspiring to harm him politically, that presupposes Epstein possessed the ammunition to do so. If there was no dirt, no skeletons, no sordid history between Trump and the island predator, what exactly did Epstein have to conspire about? Trump's threat of a lawsuit is an accidental admission that Jeffrey Epstein was a credible vessel of explosive, career-ending secrets about Donald Trump. A man with a clean conscience says, "Release the files. There is nothing to find." A man threatening to sue over the attempt to find information is a man terrified of what has already been found. The content of these newly released files amplifies the horror of this admission. Within the digital pile of evidence lies a confession from Epstein himself, captured by Wolff's persistent investigation. In a recording documented within the release, Epstein is heard stating with chilling nonchalance that Trump was fully informed. He knew exactly what was going on regarding the recruitment of vulnerable girls. In a statement that should redefine the entire narrative, Epstein claims Trump even made requests to Maxwell, urging her to cease facilitating the flow of young women, presumably not out of moral outrage, but because the liability had become too hot to handle. This is not a theory of guilt by association. This is a dead predator alleging that the former president possessed direct contemporaneous knowledge of a criminal sex trafficking enterprise. That is the fire Donald Trump is threatening to walk into. The procedural reality is that Trump currently possesses no high ground. By declaring his intention to sue Wolff for defamation or conspiracy, he is not merely defending his honor. He is handing Wolff the weapon he desires most, A lawsuit from Trump against Wolff creates a separate legal front where Wolff can demand discovery. If Melania's case grants him a scalpel to dissect the Epstein introductions, Donald's separate lawsuit would grant him a sledgehammer to smash open the entire timeline. Trump would be forced to sit across from Wolff's legal team and attempt to explain away every photograph, every witness, and every sentence whispered by Epstein without invoking the Fifth Amendment. Michael Wolff's reaction to the president's airborne declaration was not anxiety. It was a giddy, defiant embrace of the chaos. He immediately went public to remind the world of the score. He stated that the rich and powerful have tried to crush him with legal threats multiple times now, yet the scoreboard currently reads the opposite of their intent. Bring it on became the sum of his legal strategy. He practically invited a crossfire of litigation, noting with a laugh that he has no secrets, whereas the family suing him has a mountain of them. This is the truly demented nature of the current standoff. Wolff is fundraising to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars specifically to prove the truth of the Trump-Epstein connection. He is the hunter, and the Trumps, by threatening to arrest him for hunting on their land, are inviting him inside their house. Trump filing a new lawsuit would be a catastrophic duplication of failure. It is the legal equivalent of a man stranded in a leaky rowboat, deciding the best way to stay dry is to blast another hole through the hull with a shotgun. The timing of the Justice Department's tidal wave of releases adds a final layer of suspicion and cinematic dread to this saga. The synchronous flood of documents, coinciding with Melania's attempts to monetize her story through a highly produced personal documentary film, feels less like bureaucratic coincidence and more like a deeply pointed message from a dark state or a faction within the federal apparatus. Wolff has characterized this maneuver as a strategic flooding of the zone, overwhelming the public's bandwidth, so no single damning headline survives the pressure. Yet the effect is the polar opposite. The sheer scale of the release conveys a terrifying confidence from the people holding the files. The unspoken inference is a planetary-scale dare. The American public wants the veil lifted. Here it is. Every sordid email, every flight manifest, every snapshot, dig through it. The court of public opinion has already rendered a moral verdict. A supermajority of the citizenry demands transparency. They want the names, the dates, and the contexts, with the sole protection of redaction reserved for the victims who have suffered enough. This hunger for truth is an immovable force, and the Trump strategy of launching billion-dollar litigation missiles at journalists is a staggeringly fragile object standing in its way. Watching the pattern of behavior, a psychological profile emerges that is impossible to ignore. The sequence is always the same: threaten annihilation, never follow through, and hope the target silences themselves out of fear. This is the architecture of an authoritarian impulse, yet it is deployed with the strategic competence of a demolition crew who has wired the explosives backward. The innocent do not operate this way. The innocent do not hire global legal conglomerates to debate the technical validity of a doorman's signature. The innocent do not recycle the same empty threats against the same writer for years on end without ever walking into the light of a courtroom to prove their sanctity. The innocent demand the trial. They race to the deposition. They publish the receipts. The guilty hire fixers, draft cease and desist orders, and pray that the audio recordings are lost. The fatal structural flaw in the Trump fortress is that the truth was never contained within Wolff's notebooks. It was scattered across servers and crime scene photos. The recordings of Epstein's voice detailing his friendship with Trump are physical objects. The emails from Melania to Maxwell are digital fossils embedded in the geological record of the internet. Maxwell is a living witness rotting in a cell, and the memories of the victims are scarred into permanence. Lawsuits cannot redact history. You cannot sue a photograph into oblivion. You cannot threaten a timestamp into silence. With every rage-fueled declaration aboard a plane, Donald Trump does not protect his mystique. He degrades it. He reminds the world that the great intimidator is terrified of a man with a pen and a recording device. He confirms that the only power he truly respects is the power he cannot kill, and Michael Wolff, buoyed by the Constitution and a legal trust fund of public donations, has proven himself unkillable. The journalist has become the kryptonite, and the former president, in a fit of mid-air rage, has just decided to swallow a handful of it. The denouement of this saga is already written in the ink of inevitability. The Trump team has a binary choice. They can finally put their money where their threats are and walk into the deposition room, where every question is a needle and every answer risks perjury. Or they can retreat, and retreat again, allowing the silence of their dropped lawsuits to scream the guilt they refuse to whisper. But the middle ground, the tightrope of threatening without acting, has been severed. The public no longer fears the threats. They laugh at them. The emperor is not only naked, he is suing the tailor for pointing it out, while the evidence of his nakedness is being live-streamed to the entire planet. Bring the lawsuits. Let the discovery rip. Let the depositions commence. The symbiotic dance between the predator and the journalist has reached its final act, and the audience is riveted. The Trump dynasty placed $1 billion bet that they could annihilate a single voice, but in doing so, they created a platform for that voice to echo into the halls of justice. The truth is not coming. It is already here. And no amount of legal intimidation, no rage-filled tweet, and no billion-dollar threat can return it to the shadows.